Welcome to Christy's Bits of Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Christy. My goal is to help you start your mornings off right by sharing a short story or a parable that will motivate and encourage you to live your best life with God. By using the infinite wisdom found in His Word, you truly can live a life of happiness and peace in Christ. I'm living proof. I hope you'll stick around and subscribe. Also, if you like what you hear, please share with your friends and family so they can scoop up some bits of wisdom for themselves. Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of the podcast. I hope you had a great Tuesday and I hope you'll have an even better Wednesday today. It's called Hump Day because we're right in the middle of the week, almost there. Friday's coming, so hang on. um, Today's episode, I want to title it, What Would Peter Do? So we've all heard that saying, what would Jesus do, right? So I want to talk about what would Peter do? Um, I never thought that I would ever utter these words. Christians aren't perfect. They're human. Because back when I was young and I first started going to church, I was about 17, 18 years old when I first started going. I used to hold those who served God up to some kind of impossibly high standard or some kind of impossible plateau that they could never reach or they could never live up to as long as they were here on earth. Um, I put really high expectations on them as if they were already walking around in their new sinless bodies that only come when we get to heaven. And the reason I did that is because I always had this, before I really come to know God and to understand who He was, I always had this vision of Him being, just this judgmental God who was fast to crack the whip if you messed up and, just almost like an angry God. Because that's the type of household I was raised in, and whatever you're raised and whatever you see, however you see authority behaving, um, when you're little, however that authority, those who have authority over you, however they behave, you just get that in your mind that that's how all authority behaves. And God is certainly the ultimate authority. And so when I saw those in authority over me being the way that they were, I just assumed that's how God was too. But it's not. I'm here to say that thankfully I found out who God really is about 4 years ago. I come to know Him as the most kind, most loving Father. Um, I never dreamed that He would ever be who He is in my life and how He is. So, after I come to get to know God and get to know Him as love, I realize now how hard I was on those people when I was young, and I'm sorry for it. I now see that all that was legalism, and nobody can live up to that. That's how the Pharisees believed. That's how the Pharisees were. Um, I now see what grace really means and how it was the sole purpose of Jesus when He came to earth to die and then to raise again. And I now understand that while we're here, we're going to feel things and say things that don't line up perfectly with what we will be one day after we're changed and in heaven. Because then we'll have glorified bodies, then we'll be perfect. But until then, we're still human and we're still going to mess up and we're still going to make mistakes. And I used to be really hard on myself. And I'm not saying that I'm not still hard on myself, because I am. Listen, there are some days that I mess up that I just feel like, my whole world is falling apart because of it. And I'm my own worst critic. I'm the hardest on myself. And I've come a long way, but I still have a long way to go. But anyway, uh, like right now, while we're on earth, we are still in the flesh, as they say. um, and we have to try our best to not sin, and we have to try our best to be perfect. And like I said yesterday, we're never going to attain perfection here on earth. But if we try every day to walk as close to God and live as close to Him as we can, um, we will we won't sin. So we have to live according to the principles of God, and like I said, walk as close as we can each day. Um, His Word tells us not to sin. So we're not supposed to sin. We know that. We're not supposed to willingly sin. But the Bible also says, but if we do sin, we have an advocate with the Father, and that is Jesus. And Jesus was given to us as a sacrifice to reconcile us back to God the Father. And without His coming to earth, His dying, without His shed blood, there would be no forgiveness of sin and no reconciliation with the Father, and then no hope of being with Him in heaven for all of eternity after we die. Um, so if you're not perfect, like me, and none of us are, just remember that we all have a way to God through Jesus. We can ask for mercy and grace, and we can expect that it will be given because His Word promises. And it says, "Come boldly to the throne of grace, where you may obtain mercy." Um, I forget where that's at exactly. I'm sorry. Um, but we can ask for that mercy and grace, and He promises that we'll get it. So, and He also tells us that where sin abounds, grace does much more abound. So if you find yourself in a situation where, let's say, for example, I was talking to my sister-in-law today about an incident that had happened 3 years ago when I worked at Dollywood. It was with a customer, and she got extremely upset at my coworker, and somehow I got dragged in the middle of it. And she was really like giving us a really hard time. And my flesh, my flesh wanted to jump over the counter and, give her the what for, like Andy Griffith says. But my spirit wouldn't let me, because I'm a witness for God. I'm a Christian. I'm supposed to be Christ-like. Um, but, so I was upset. I was upset inside. And, when I didn't say anything out of the way to her, I just took all that she gave me. And when she left, I became very upset on the outside. And I told my coworker, I said, I need to go find her and just, whoop her. But I didn't. That's sin. And so I asked the Lord to help me. I took a break. We went up to our break room. I took a break and I prayed and I said, Lord, help me. So where that sin was of wanting to manifest itself, of me wanting to go, beat that woman up. Grace was much more abundant. And so when I called on the Lord to help me, He did. He sent grace, and He brought me out of that bad mood that I was in and out of that anger and stuff. So, that really reassures me to know that wherever the enemy is with sin, wanting to try to make us sin, that there's so much more grace. There's so much more grace that we can grab a hold of. But anyway, I started out this episode and this whole little blog to say that although I try every day to make it a what would Jesus do kind of day, it doesn't always turn out like that. Some days are more of like a what would Peter do kind of day, where we allow our anger to come to the forefront and get the best of us. Just like Peter did when he defended Jesus and he drew out his sword and he sliced off the man's ear. And Jesus was like, come on, put your sword up. That's not, we're not doing this. And Jesus, bent down, got the man's ear and put it up to his head and reattached it. But Jesus he didn't get mad. He didn't ball Peter out and say, "What is wrong with you?" Blah, blah, blah. He just said, Peter, we can't be acting like that. We can't be doing that. Um, none of us want to act that way. None of us want to get angry. None of us want to let our flesh get the best of us. But sometimes our adversary, Satan, the devil, the roaring lion who walks about, he knows how to use certain people in certain situations and certain circumstances to push our buttons. And that causes us to almost pull out our sword like Peter did. God forbid we would do that. And even I'm not even talking physically pull out a sword, but I'm talking like mentally or emotionally. Sometimes just even wanting to do it is just as bad as if we do it. So I just want to say that today I'm going to strive with everything in me to live a what would Jesus do kind of day. But if I fall short, and if you fall short, because we're human, and we end up living a what would Peter do kind of day, all we have to do is repent, ask the Lord for forgiveness, ask Him for that grace that abounds much more than sin, and then strive even harder tomorrow. Because I've learned that it's a walk with God each day. It's not a sprint, it's a walk. We walk with Him and we learn as we go. And the Bible tells us that we have all sinned and come short of the glory of God because we're not perfect. We've all sinned and come short. And I'm thankful that God has shown me how to not hold others up to a standard that can never be met on earth. And I'm thankful for His grace and mercy, because without both of those things, I wouldn't be here doing this podcast today. I wouldn't be able to talk about the goodness of God without those two things. So I want to give you some helpful verses that you can take, and like I say all the time, you can cross-reference these. You can read each one and then cross-reference them, and it'll give you a good little study on grace and mercy. The first one is found in 1 John 2, verse number 1. Then Romans 5, verse number 20. And Matthew 26, verse number 51. And Romans 3, verse number 23. And I hope this has encouraged you today to know that you're never going to be perfect. So I'm not going to say stop trying to be perfect, but just take heart in knowing that you'll never get there. None of us are ever going to be perfect. The Bible tells us, though, that we have to have a perfect heart toward God. And as long as our hearts are perfect toward Him, meaning that we want to live a life in such a way that we please Him, that's all He asks. He doesn't say, "Okay, Christy, you get up today and you got to do this, this." He doesn't give me like 100 things on my list and expect me to do everything perfect. He knows I'm going to mess up. He knows I'm human. He knows I have flesh. But He says, as long as I have a perfect heart toward Him and I love Him and I want to strive to keep His commandments and to abide by His principles, that's all He asks. So don't be too hard on yourself today. Don't beat yourself up if you mess up. Just go to God and say, "Listen, Lord, you know what? I messed up. I'm going to need you to help me." And I promise He will. Because like I said, where sin abounds, grace abounds so much more. But anyway, I hope y'all have enjoyed it, and I will catch you tomorrow.